Paramedicine over the past 30 years has evolved to make it into a career of high esteem and respect, and with this evolution, so has the clinical rationale and decisions made on a daily basis across ambulances around the world. Ethical decision making has become a new skill set on the paramedic tool belt, which is essential to practice but also under constant scrutiny. In the case presented, Maxine's ethical decisions and the foundation these decisions were made on will be compared to legal and ethical frameworks that other paramedics operate in, and recommendations will be made for policy change that will prevent or lessen the impact of similar incidences in the future. When Maxine approached the case, she based her decisions on the principle of utilitarianism, greatest good for greatest number. It was clear that the end result was the same. 2 people survived and 1 died. But beyond that, Benham created 7 principles of utility, which dictate how to evaluate the greatest good. The specific principles that apply in this case are duration, fecundity, and extent. The baby has the greatest number of years to live to old age, therefore duration is greater. Not only that, but the baby's life extends happiness to both parents, and the happiness will continue to be produced for the parent. This indicates that the greatest good would be produced by saving the baby. Furthermore, Maxine could have likely displayed bias to the young mother with the dying baby over a middle-aged mother with a teenager. This could allude to ethical egoism, where Maxine projected her self-interest as the young mother, which would have affected her decision. The ethical egoism principle dictates that the moral agent's interests have greater impact than the consequences and means of producing results. Therefore, saving the baby is in self-interest of her value of young motherhood, and the risk and consequences of her actions do not compare. Bioethics indicates that distributive justice reinforces Maxine's decisions to attend to the baby. Distributive justice acknowledges that limited resources will directly affect the limitations of ethical decisions. The model best used would be to consider a single ambulance had to either go to the baby or the lady. The next step is to consider what society would deem as appropriate allocation of resources, and this would be the distributive just thing to do. It is likely that society would believe a baby's life is greater value than a middle-aged lady. This reinforces the principle of distributive justice, that societal needs are just as important as a patient's needs. Maxine may be an ideal paramedic, although her decisions in this situation were neither ethical nor legally appropriate. The deontological principles indicate that an action should only be done if it is good within itself. On top of this principle, each action must be universal. If Maxine had had a motor vehicle accident when not in uniform, regardless if she was speeding or for whatever reason, it would be morally right to pull over and render assistance to the affected parties, even though it would inconvenience her. The legislation takes it one step further, stating that the driver must stop at the scene of a crash. This does not specify if emergency workers have exemptions to this law. Therefore, the legal system borrows elements of deontology, referring that some actions taken, regardless of professions or consequences, are legally and morally right. Virtue ethics is considered to be one of the oldest approaches in ethics. Its emphasis is on the virtues that drive decision-making rather than the rules and consequences associated with that decision. In today's society, virtue ethics has been modernized into codes of conduct and legislation that outline desirable virtues that, if followed, will ensure professionalism and safety is met at all times. Unfortunately for Maxine, she failed to deliver on the ethical principles outlined in the Public Sector Act, which indicates impartiality to saving lives, promoting the public good by not taking unnecessary risks, and being accountable for actions leading to injury and death. Unfortunately for Maxine, she has breached multiple state regulations that are otherwise indefensible. It is clear from Max's testimony that Maxine failed to show reasonable care when operating the emergency vehicle, by speeding, possibly causing a second crash with a ute, and not approaching intersections appropriately. This indicates that this was unlawful dangerous operation of a vehicle that led to grievous bodily harm without intent. Furthermore, grievous bodily harm without intent indicates that Maxine could be liable to negligence, as her inaction to at least check the mother led to her death. Additionally, common law precedent of Loans and Wood dictates that Maxine, as an on-duty medical professional, has duty of care to respond to the mother's imminent injury, and refused to render assistance by driving off, indicating that, like Dr. Loans, Maxine, identified as a medical professional, should have rendered assistance, as that would be the communal expectation of service by bystanders. In rebuttal, even though Maxine achieved distributive justice for the baby, she failed to uphold the principle of non-maleficence. She directly caused harm through her actions and is therefore accountable to the affected driver. Furthermore, Maxine's justification of utilitarianism fails to acknowledge that the principles of greatest good also analyzes pain, and the pain caused to the motherless and fatherless child is greater. Not to mention that the government will now need to take on the social and financial responsibilities of taking care of that child. In situations like Maxine's, where the end result was the death of a mother and a child being left in the care of social services, recommendations have been suggested to prevent similar situations in the future. As stated in the Australasian Company Standards of Paramedics, all paramedics are required to maintain fitness of practice. This standard includes the ability to practice safely in all aspects of practice, such as professional conduct, physical and psychological well-being, and acting in a reasonable and responsible manner. The first recommendation includes compulsory counselling services for paramedics who have been on leave for an extended period of time. Such services will identify any conflicts of interest with the paramedic returning to work, which is part of the Queensland Public Services Code of Conduct, which could be run by Priority 1. In Maxine's case, the birth of her child affected her professional practice and ethical decision-making, resulting in inappropriate decisions and breaches of legislation. Another recommendation includes a compulsory defensive driver course refresher. As Maxine had been absent from her duty as a paramedic for an extended period of time, it's necessary to reinforce reasons for taking risks and negotiating with drivers. This ensures safe implementation of defensive driving. It may also be necessary to appoint paramedics returning to work to a temporary role in a low acuity response unit. Such a role does not require driving Code 1 to a case, allowing paramedics to ease back into their clinical skills and eventually return to their normal ACP role without any doubt of incompetence or dangerous behaviour. Lastly, considering there is already CPG existing used by QAS paramedics to identify hazards within an environment, there should also be a guideline or protocol used by paramedics to identify and stop other paramedics at personal risk of hurting themselves or others. In Maxine's case, Max was able to identify the potential risks before entering the vehicle, but failed to stop Maxine from becoming hazardous, resulting in dangerous operation of the vehicle, leading to grievous bodily harm.